Parker Schnabel, once the unstoppable face of gold rush, has seen his golden empire collapse, not with a bang from an excavator, but with the clang of prison doors slamming shut. Once hailed as a prodigy for pulling millions from frozen earth, Parker now faces life imprisonment, without parole and with no appeals remaining, following one of the most shocking environmental verdicts in mining history. This is the same Parker who used his college savings to kickstart his mining career, extracted over $13 million in gold before turning 24, and transformed muddy mining sites into a $24 million reality TV spectacle during season 14 alone. Today, his $16 million earnings for this year are frozen, his Dominion Creek claims are under scrutiny, and fans everywhere are asking, how did one of TV's most relentless miners fall so far, so fast? Pressure was nothing new for Parker. He'd been battling the elements and chasing gold since he was a teenager. By his mid-20s, he'd already unearthed a fortune, and season 14's $24 million haul should have set him up for life. With gold prices soaring higher than ever as season 15 began, Parker seemed poised for another record-breaking year. But instead, he found himself teetering on the edge of financial ruin, personal collapse, and ultimately something much darker. It only took one pivotal decision to turn his dream season into a nightmare. At the start of the season, Parker had one goal: mine 10,000 ounces of gold. A staggering target worth over $26 million at current market rates. Achieving it would take more than hard work. It demanded massive production, relentless pace, and zero setbacks. Determined, Parker made an aggressive move. He spent $2.5 million on two legendary claims, Gold Run and Sulphur Creek. These weren't just any properties. They were historic sites, having produced a combined $1.5 billion in gold over the last century. But the ground was risky, stripped, unstable, and full of unknown hazards. Parker didn't hesitate. Chasing greatness, he went all in. To get operations started, Parker needed to relocate Bob, his biggest wash plant, from Ken and Stewart's claim to Sulphur Creek. It was a grueling 25-mile haul, the longest he'd ever attempted, and he demanded the move be completed within just 10 hours. Against all odds, the team barely pulled it off, repairing breakdowns on the fly and pushing limits. And for a brief moment, it looked like Parker's gamble had paid off. In only 4 days, Bob processed enough dirt to pull 290.05 ounces of gold, roughly $766,000. Combined with another 270.01 ounces from Roxanne at the elbow cut, Parker's crew hit 6,000 ounces, securing $16 million in earnings. The dream was alive, but not for long. Beneath the surface, cracks had already begun to form. At Dominion Creek and Bridge Cut, trouble brewed. Big Red, Parker's iconic workhorse wash plant, finally gave out after 12 seasons and more than $53 million in gold. The plant's critical tension bars snapped, halting production completely. Big Red had produced over 34,300 ounces over its lifetime. Now it was useless. With only Bob and Roxanne still operational, Parker's margin for error vanished. And then came the legal storms, the ones viewers didn't see. In his rush to expand before winter set in, Parker had made a critical mistake. He purchased neighboring claims through a private deal, bypassing crucial environmental reviews. From the moment his team broke ground at Sulphur Creek, concerns surfaced. Missing permits, potential disturbances of protected waterways, and old buried fuel tanks nobody had accounted for. At first, the warning signs were subtle. Delayed inspections, quiet visits from government agents, but they quickly escalated. As Parker pushed for 24/7 production, hauling thousands of tons of gravel across sensitive land, those warning signs turned into subpoenas. Then the real trouble hit. Federal prosecutors filed charges, accusing Parker of serious environmental violations, illegal dredging, damage to federally protected streams, improper waste handling, all tied to that $2.5 million land acquisition. And the deeper investigators dug, the worse it got. Missing documentation, unauthorized permit overrides, and most damning of all, falsified inspection reports allegedly directed by Parker himself. Suddenly, the gold rush wasn't about gold anymore. It was about evidence. In court, the case against Parker was overwhelming. Prosecutors presented 68 documented violations, totaling more than $3.1 million in unauthorized site alterations, with over 8,000 gallons of hydraulic fluid unaccounted for and contaminated soil around equipment sites. Parker's defense team scrambled, arguing that mistakes were due to subcontractors and bureaucratic delays, not deliberate wrongdoing. But their arguments fell apart when damning email threads surfaced, messages showing Parker pushing his crew to ignore regulatory agencies and prioritize production at all costs. And then came the final blow. A former crew member testified that Parker had been warned multiple times about missing permits and potential violations, but knowingly pressed forward anyway. What had started as a question of responsibility became a damning portrait of a leader driven by ambition, willing to cut corners to hit that 10,000-ounce goal. The consequences were catastrophic. Charge after charge stacked up. Environmental misconduct, reckless excavation, falsified records, and obstruction of justice. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a pattern, a systematic disregard for the law that prosecutors called deliberate endangerment. When the obstruction charges were added, Parker's fate was sealed. Parker Schnabel, once the face of Gold Rush and the youngest prodigy to extract millions from the frozen earth, is now far from the controls of his excavator. Instead, he finds himself behind locked doors after a shocking verdict in one of the most significant environmental cases in mining history. His empire has crumbled, with the sentence handed down: life imprisonment, no parole, and no possibility of appeal. This is the same Parker who used his college fund to launch a mining business, who amassed over $13 million worth of gold by the time he was 24, and who turned raw earth into television gold. In fact, during Gold Rush Season 14 alone, he earned $24 million. But now, the $16 million he earned this year remains frozen, his Dominion Creek claims under investigation, and his once loyal fans left wondering how Parker, once the hardest-working miner on TV, could go from legend to locked away. Parker has always thrived under pressure. By his early 20s, he'd already pulled over $13 million worth of gold. And in Season 14, his team raked in $24 million. By Season 15, with gold prices soaring, he was poised for even greater success. But instead of basking in victory, he was teetering on the edge of financial ruin, a breakdown, and something much darker. Somewhere between chasing ounces and chasing a legacy, Parker made a decision that would change everything, sending him straight into a courtroom. Heading into Season 15, Parker set his sights on one goal: 10,000 ounces. At current gold prices, that would net over $26 million, a massive haul. But to achieve it, Parker knew he needed more than just hard work. He needed volume, big paydays, and zero delays. That's when he made a move that raised eyebrows. He dropped $2.5 million to acquire two massive claims, Gold Run and Sulphur Creek. These weren't just ordinary claims. They were historic, some of the richest in the Klondike, having produced $1.5 billion in gold over the past century. But they came with significant risks: unstable terrain, stripped ground, and unknown liabilities. Undeterred, Parker gambled on greatness, willing to risk everything to make it work. To move his largest wash plant, Bob, from Ken and Stewart's claim to Sulphur Creek, Parker gave his crew just 10 hours, a 25-mile haul, the longest they'd ever attempted. It was an insane deadline, but somehow they made it happen. Mechanics scrambled to repair broken parts, Tyson Lee handled logistics, and finally, Bob was up and running. For a moment, everything seemed perfect. Just 4 days in, Bob pulled in 290.05 ounces worth $766,000, and with another 276.01 ounces from Roxanne at elbow cut, Parker's team surpassed the 6,000-ounce mark, bringing in $16 million. But the deeper they dug at Dominion Creek and Bridge Cut, the more problems surfaced. Big Red, Parker's workhorse wash plant, broke down after 12 seasons and over $53 million worth of gold. It had brought in over 34,300 ounces over the years, but now it was gone. With only Bob and Roxanne in operation, Parker's margin for error had evaporated. He needed everything to go right, but everything didn't. What viewers didn't see was the growing legal trouble. In the rush to expand his claims and extract every last ounce before winter, Parker made some hasty decisions. He purchased neighboring claims under a private contract, bypassing environmental review steps. The moment his team began digging at Sulphur Creek, questions arose about permits, the disturbance of protected waterways, and buried fuel tanks. Delayed inspections, quiet visits from government officials, the red flags were there, but Parker kept pushing. As his team worked around the clock, hauling gravel through protected areas, those flags turned into subpoenas. And then came the bombshell. Federal charges were filed. Parker was accused of willful environmental violations, illegal dredging, disrupting federally protected streams, and negligence in waste disposal. As prosecutors dug deeper, they uncovered missing documentation, permit overrides, and falsified inspection reports allegedly signed by subcontractors under Parker's direction. Suddenly, the show wasn't about gold. It was about evidence. Prosecutors argued that Parker knowingly pushed his operation beyond legal limits in order to hit his 10,000-ounce target, ignoring warnings and putting the environment and public safety at risk. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. 68 documented violations, over $3.1 million in unauthorized site alterations, contaminated soil around equipment zones, and more than 8,000 gallons of unaccounted-for hydraulic fluid. Parker's defense team argued it was all an accident, that the missing permits were just delays and subcontractors had dropped the ball. But things started to unravel when the emails were revealed in court. One email showed Parker pushing for non-stop production and telling his team to ignore agency interference. That thread kept coming up in court, and each time, the atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier. Then came the game-changing testimony. A former crew member who had left halfway through the season stepped forward. He claimed that Parker was fully aware of the incomplete paperwork and the potential violations, but pressed on anyway. This wasn't just a debate about responsibility. It was about a leader under pressure who made dangerous decisions in pursuit of success. The charges stacked up: environmental misconduct, site damage, falsified inspection reports, and reckless excavation on federal land. Prosecutors called it a pattern of deliberate disregard for regulations, and when obstruction was added to the list, things turned even more serious. The court ruled that Parker's actions caused the highest level of environmental harm, triggering sentencing guidelines that stunned everyone. While the headlines screamed scandal, the sentencing itself didn't match the drama. There was no mugshot, no dramatic walk of shame, just Parker disappearing from the public eye. Rumors swirled. Some said he was negotiating restitution, others claimed he was in protective custody. But nobody knew for sure. What was clear, however, was that Parker had vanished from the spotlight. This was the kid who started mining as a teenager, pulled in over $13 million by age 24, and led several successful spin-offs, including Gold Rush Parker's Trail. And now he was gone. No word, no updates, nothing. The strange part? Parker had never been the flashy type. Unlike many celebrities, he didn't spend his wealth on mansions or fancy cars. At the height of his success, he admitted to sleeping on a friend's couch in LA. He didn't splurge on status symbols, but rather on experiences: trips with his dad, weekends with his crew, and World Series tickets. Money was never the goal. Loyalty and memories were. This mindset came from his roots: a grandfather who carved a life out of the Alaskan wilderness, a father who still wakes up at 4:30 every morning to work. Parker had always understood that money fades, but legacy endures. And now, that legacy was at risk. Season 15 was supposed to be his breakthrough, his moment to hit 10,000 ounces and leave the competition behind. But instead, it became the season people are calling cursed. Equipment breakdowns, permit nightmares, and legal threats stacked up. Parker, despite his best efforts to stay focused and keep things moving, was caught in a downward spiral. Now, no one knows what comes next. The $16 million he earned this season is tied up in legal reviews, his claims are on hold, and his crew is scattered. Some remain quiet, others are trying to hold things together, but with Parker gone, everything feels different. Dominion Creek was Parker's biggest gamble. He didn't just lease the land, he bought it outright, paying $15 million up front with no refunds. But the gold at Dominion wasn't easy to access. It was buried more than 40 feet deep, requiring millions in equipment, labor, and time to retrieve. On paper, it looked like a smart move. An estimated 80,000 ounces of gold worth $160 million, if he could pull it off. The plan was to extract 10,000 ounces a year for 6 seasons. But there was a catch. The permits and water licenses only lasted 6 years, and after that, nothing was guaranteed. So Parker pushed all in, and his crew began moving massive amounts of dirt. The workload was crushing, with over 25 million bankers to move over the life of the claim, an amount that, when expanded, turned into nearly 30 million yards. The pressure hit everyone. Equipment broke down, crews wore down, and schedules slipped. Every delay meant more lost money, and every ounce not recovered was $1 Parker wouldn't get back. For him, failure wasn't an option, not with that upfront payment, not with the timeline, and certainly not when everything was riding on him staying ahead of the pace. Let's rewind a bit. Parker didn't get to this point by playing it safe. From the moment he first appeared on Gold Rush Alaska in 2010, he showed he was different from the rest. While others were buying trucks and toys, Parker focused on strategy and crew management. By the time he was 24, he had already mined $13 million in gold, and by season 14, his haul grew to $24 million. The show followed his journey all the way to the Klondike, Oregon, Colorado, and even Guyana. He was a worker, a planner, and most importantly, a fighter. But in season 15, something changed. Dominion Creek was a game changer, but so was the pressure. Parker admitted that the true fear wasn't the financial burden, it was the possibility of losing his crew. He feared downsizing and cutting ties with those who had been with him from the beginning. He'd rather lose money than lose the people who mattered. That's why he chose to expand, not shrink. He didn't pivot or bail out. Instead, he bought more land, grew his operations, and secured a deal with Metallic Minerals for exclusive mining rights to a 12-kilometer stretch of Australia Creek. This agreement alone came with a $1 million annual commitment, plus royalty payments on every ounce mined. This massive scale of operations meant the pressure was higher than ever. With $200 million in long-term potential at stake, the standard was set at an all-time high. But as the operations grew, so did the mistakes. Every breakdown in equipment, every weather delay, every ounce of gold not recovered, it all added up. And that's when the tension started to seep into relationships. Parker didn't see much of Rick Ness that season. Their paths barely crossed. In fact, they only had one major conversation on camera during a difficult time for Rick. Beyond that, they operated in separate lanes. The same thing happened with Tony Beats. A few years ago, Parker and Tony were constantly at odds over everything: permits, ground, royalties. But this time, the distance between them grew. They had a few friendly cups of coffee off camera, but that was it. Parker didn't owe Tony anything anymore. He owned his own ground, held his own permits, and wasn't paying royalty checks anymore. There were fewer fights, but also less connection. And when the stress of Dominion started piling up, there wasn't a lot of outside support for Parker. He stayed locked in, head down, focused on keeping up. At the same time, he continued pushing forward with his public commitments. He sealed a major deal with Metallic, continued working on a massive drilling program, and even received the Robert E. Leckie Award in 2022 from the Yukon government for environmental stewardship. Just 2 years later, his operations were under legal scrutiny. That's how quickly things can change in the mining world. One season you're winning awards, and the next, you're being investigated. Off the clock, Parker stayed true to his low-key lifestyle. He didn't live in mansions or party in private jets. He was often found sleeping on friends' couches, whether it was in LA, Mexico, or the Bahamas. He wasn't flashy. He just wanted to keep moving, to push forward. Maybe that was part of the issue. While everyone was wondering how a 20-something could amass $13 million by 24, Parker was reinvesting it, taking risks, and doubling down on new land. And he wasn't doing it in some high-rise boardroom. He was 40 feet underground at Dominion Creek, where one wrong decision could ruin an entire season. By 2024, estimates had Parker's worth around $8 to $10 million. Not quite what you'd expect from a guy who had been the star of a top-rated Discovery Channel show for over a decade. He didn't wear watches that cost more than a car or collect rare cars. In fact, he didn't even own much. The modest house in Haines, Alaska that he called home was just 2,000 square feet. It had a metal roof and wood frame, not exactly what most would associate with a celebrity. At one point, rumors surfaced that he bought a $950,000 mansion, but Parker denied it. He preferred the couch life, saying he was homeless by choice. And with Parker, it makes sense. This is the same guy who used his entire college fund to bet on himself when most teens were choosing dorms. That $17 million gamble on Dominion Creek wasn't his first. It was just the loudest, the most public, and the riskiest. The gold wasn't easy to access at Dominion. It was buried 40 feet down in frozen soil. Parker needed to move 30 million bank yards of dirt over the next 6 years to make it work, which meant working millions of yards every year. The pressure wasn't just on the equipment. It weighed heavily on the people, too. Dominion wasn't a small-scale operation. It was massive, a gold-hungry machine, and Parker was the only one willing to take it on. Even when gold prices reached record highs, Parker didn't slow down. He invested everything he had, hired more people, added more equipment, and signed royalty deals with Metallic Minerals to mine Australia Creek. He wasn't just mining gold, he was building a gold empire. And the work didn't stop at Yukon. He went global. Guyana, Papua New Guinea, Alaska, Australia, Brazil. He mined from the Klondike to the jungle, from glaciers to rainforests. When other crews packed up for winter, Parker was halfway across the world, filming Parker's Trail, digging up gold in places most wouldn't dare to go. He earned millions in TV payouts, mining profits, and sponsorships. His crew made anywhere from $10,000 to $25,000 per episode. It was a well-oiled machine, but with all the millions and all the shows, Parker wasn't chasing money. Not really. What he was after was legacy. He wanted to live up to his grandfather's standards, protect his crew, and prove that someone from a quiet town in Alaska could take on the world's toughest industry and win. That's why the moment he's in now is so difficult for everyone to digest. This isn't a celebrity caught in a scandal. This is Parker Schnabel, the kid who grew up in mud, who never gave up, and who built an empire with a backhoe and a loyal crew. To see it all put on pause, even temporarily, is a tough pill for everyone to swallow. His $16 million haul from this season is frozen. His Dominion claims are under legal review, his royalty sites are silent, and his future is uncertain. While Discovery continues airing season 15, everyone knows the elephant in the room. Nobody's saying it, but everyone feels it. So the question remains, does Parker come back stronger than ever, or does this mark the end of his golden run?